Okay, everyone. Well, thank you for tuning in and welcome to CTO Talk. I am your host, Matt Ferrari. On this 30-minute program, we get to discuss issues, challenges, and even opportunities that is impacting healthcare technology. You can always follow the show on Twitter at #CTO Talk and follow me at MP Ferrari. With me, I'm really excited today. I get to talk to Scott Whyte, the Chief Strategy Officer at ClearDATA. I've had the privilege of working with Scott for almost 5 years now. Scott really leads the way as it relates to strategy in healthcare for ClearDATA, really arming folks like myself and others in our industry with really great insights into what is happening in healthcare. And today, what I wanted to talk about was the convergence of innovation and compliance. And with HIMSS coming up soon, I assume it's really on everyone's mind around what's going to be hot to talk about at HIMSS. So we want to dive into that as well. So welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you, Matt. Great to be here.
Excellent. So would really kind of love to pick your brain today. Why don't we start with, some examples of customers? You get to talk to customers all the time around emerging technologies that they're looking to improve healthcare or their patient care with while remaining compliant. Would you mind walking us through some of those examples?
Absolutely. I just think it's an incredibly exciting time in healthcare. Having been doing this for 30 years and looking at different parts, I think it's the most exciting time since I've been here. So I hope everyone shares that because we got a chance to really improve how we take care of patients and try to get more access by squeezing out cost and inviting and including patients more in their own care and effectiveness in health. So great time. In terms of some themes for customers, I'll highlight that first before I get into the examples. One would be, I see a lot of convergence, collaboration from different segments of the healthcare industry. So for instance, providers working with payers, or life sciences companies working with providers, or patients again, and engaging better with care delivery. So those are three examples of some broad themes I see happening. And of course, each of those themes has absolutely a need for compliance like we haven't seen before. So in the example of the providers, some specific examples, working with payers, for instance, we're seeing many of the Blues and Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield in New Jersey we've worked with for many years, and they are helping equip the providers, the hospital systems and physician groups in their market to better understand the population health and utilization of consumption of health services, and they need data to do that. And Horizon is building out health information exchange and analytics tools and ways for providers who may only have a slice of the patient's care to see a broader view of that patient's health. Really exciting, ultimately to help equip those providers to take on risk. They're the ones, the hospitals and physicians are the ones who are closest to the patients, but they don't necessarily have the tools the payers have. So it's a great example, exciting example of collaboration, and they've already seen some terrific outcomes and benefits for their members, for the patients, and really for the community there in New Jersey. So exciting work. Another example with payers and providers would be large health information exchange, where they are doing a statewide health information exchange sponsored by the large payers in the state, one of the largest states in the country, and they're then connecting claims data, which they have, with clinical data from the hospitals and physicians, and again, to give physicians at the point of care a better view of what medications is this patient on, because I might only have a small slice of that, where the broader statewide network of providers and payers has a much more complete view. And that, again, it helps make sure we don't have medication errors or that we're not overprescribing or prescribing medications that result in complications. Very exciting work with state health information exchange. So those are a couple examples of payers and providers. We're also seeing some interesting work with life sciences and providers. And, there's been a lot of talk about personalized medicine and how do we not just have a pill and sort of throw it over the wall and have somebody take it or prescribe it, you hope, but how do we find out really specifically how effective is that medication for a specific person, and are they continue to adhere and take that medication? And so it's really getting at the clinical effectiveness, and then also the financial outcome or benefit or ROI, if you will, for that medication. So a lot of interesting work there. And one piece of work that we're doing would be related to a tumor board. And this is an example where one of the largest global pharmaceutical organizations has many oncology therapies, but some of where the rubber hits the road is how physicians interact with each other. So, there's challenges now given subspecialty expertise in oncology to get the right oncologist and surgical oncologist and radiologist and pathologist together in the same room to discuss a case like a tumor board, which they've been doing for years, but it's getting harder and harder as things are getting more specialized. And this pharmaceutical company is now enabling effectively telemedicine and teleconsult and an electronic tumor board to allow those physicians to collaborate and see genomic information and radiological information and pathology reports, and be able to see that and then collaborate on that information and develop diagnosis and treatment plans to better take care of those patients with cancer. So a great instance where a life sciences company typically would not have developed solutions to help with that kind of collaboration of providers, but that's now happening. So great example of collaboration and convergence. Well, those are a few, Matt.
That's really helpful. Scott, to take a step back for a moment, you've talked a lot about collaboration across organizations, across industries. Would you mind kind of walking through, why now? Why have these organizations started collaborating now? And before I hand it back off to you, one of the neat things that I've learned working with you is that in my experience, a lot of it also revolves around values, values of the organization to prioritize patient care or patient health or even deeper values across organizations. But I'd love to learn from you, why is this convergence happening now?
Yeah, so I think first of all, I think it's a very natural next step in we've had siloed healthcare for decades. And over time, actually when I first started, it was just even within a hospital, could a nurse get results from a laboratory and medication information, and so we had order entry systems and just the early foundations they weren't even, I don't think they were even electronic medical records truly then. And we've over time chipped away and broken down silos within organizations and then between sister hospitals or between hospitals and physicians, and that's taken a lot of time. So now they can share some information that may be on a common electronic medical record, or they may have exchange or interfaces where they can communicate with each other and share clinical and registration information. So those silos have broken down between health delivery organizations, and now we're starting to see again silos break down between payers and pharma. For instance, and providers. And your question, why is that happening? There is a lot of inefficiency. There is there's darkness between organizations when they don't communicate, and that darkness drives up cost, and it drives down quality. And so there's this need with this emphasis on driving better outcomes, where those of us who pay, whether those are individuals or employers or state or federal governments, they want to know that we're getting the best for our healthcare investment, and they want people to be healthier. So we've got to continue to break down those silos. A lot of pressure to do that, and I think it's good for consumers. It's good for patients. I think overall it's rockier, can be painful for providers to have too much information, but ultimately I think providers want a better view of the whole record of the patient, and they want better tools and to be better equipped to deliver best outcomes. So I think it's a good saying, but it's really tough, this collaboration. And part of the piece that's tough, I should highlight on the compliance side, pharmaceutical organizations, for instance, or life sciences, have been very deep and expert in FDA types of regulations and GXP globally. So they know how to make sure that a drug manufacturing line is going to consistently produce medications that are safe and that are effective and that meet the outcomes that have been approved. And so they're really good at that. And medical device companies similarly. They haven't, however, dealt with the regulations as much related to HIPAA or in Europe or elsewhere, GDPR, patient privacy and handling that type of information. So that's newer territory for them, and they need help reducing risk. And you can see similar issues for other elements of we're having cross-organizational sharing of information, and we have to be really careful, particularly considering all the bad actors and breaches and incidents that we see in the news day in and day out.
Yeah, that's something that's on my mind constantly in my role as well. And we should probably dive into some of that. So as some of the examples that you've walked through, as you think about those, Scott, and you think about some of the collaboration, what's some of the the technologies that you're seeing out there? Before this call, we were talking about some of the public cloud providers out there, but what are you seeing in terms of what these healthcare organizations are latching onto to try to solve those compliance gaps?
Yeah, so they clearly are turning to Amazon's AWS and Microsoft's Azure and Google's GCP, are amazing, hyperscale cloud solutions, and so absolutely turning to those solutions. And though they are looking to, okay, how do we take those secure building blocks and then really get the best out of those? So if their clinical or business objective is to improve care, but also to move rapidly, these organizations, there's a lot of competitive pressure as well to innovate rapidly, to differentiate themselves, and then of course to protect their patients. They're stewarding really sensitive data. They've got to protect that. And they have to also, this idea of collaboration, they have to be a trusted partner. So, these are really challenging goals. They've got kind of these right building blocks, but then they have these goals of, I got to move super fast and innovate and deliver new value. But I also have to be super careful, having the protection so that I don't get in trouble, and so that my partners will be confident in sharing with me. So that's hard to do. And it's easy to, or can be okay to sort of set it up initially and say, okay, I've got this HIPAA compliant building block and I've got this piece of the solution and I'll get it set up. But it's also very easy to drift. The public cloud is super malleable and easy to change, which is great in terms of that lever for innovation and agility. But that same ability to change things through software configuration of infrastructure means that it's also much easier to drift out of compliance and expose yourself. So tools are, things like, blocking and tackling of encryption of data in motion and at rest. There would be extensive amounts of logging and things like just making sure that the perimeter is safe through intrusion detection, constant scanning for viruses and other threats that may be in the system. All of those types of things would be elements of protection that are needed for these protecting sensitive healthcare data.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. And, pausing for a moment, for those of you who just joined, Matt Ferrari with CTO Talk, getting to talk with Scott Whyte, the Chief Strategy Officer of ClearDATA. We're talking about convergence of innovation and compliance. And Scott, to kind of piggyback on what you just talked about regarding tooling and, balancing that innovation and compliance, a lot of these healthcare organizations, this isn't their mission, right? Their mission isn't to be compliant. Compliance is just something they need to do, So I'd love, for you to provide advice to our audience, how do these organizations balance learning, how to remain compliant while adopting kind of some of this cutting edge innovation that, continuously comes out in the space. What advice do you give to folks?
Yeah, I think one thing I've really enjoyed about healthcare is there is good knowledge sharing. I mean, this CTO talk is a great example. I think all of us want to make healthcare better. I really do think that we're called, there's some sense of mission, in addition to trying to build businesses or value in our nonprofits, et cetera. So there is a sense of openness, of sharing. Here are some best practices. And people come to HIMSS to learn, to hear talks where people are telling their stories and their use cases and examples. So clearly networking is a great way to go. Searching out experts, there are partners, vendors, those that you can talk to who are experts in segments. ClearDATA focuses on security, privacy, and compliance for the cloud. And there's knowledge sharing and knowledge transfer that you can get from working from experts and attorneys or security and privacy groups. There are industry sort of trade specialty organizations and even governmental organizations that specialize in these topics. And I would say overall, I found that we as healthcare IT colleagues have been pretty good about trying to help each other and move the industry forward. So those are some ways I think to get at this information. It's also interesting. Even the hyperscale cloud providers like AWS and Microsoft and Google have some great resources. Some of that's available on the web, and then some of their thought leaders can share what they're doing, what they plan to do to continue to help their customers both innovate and be compliant.
Yeah, Scott brings up a good point. Yeah, so for those of you out there who are investigating public cloud providers in the AWS world, we've talked before about HIPAA eligible services. So if you haven't joined a previous CTO talk, know that HIPAA eligible services are updated by AWS almost every month, because that's the innovation machine that we have the opportunity to work with in healthcare. And when they update those HIPAA eligible services, there's things you have to do to keep them compliant, right? That's, as Scott mentioned earlier, that might be encryption at rest, that might be in transit, that might be identity and access management restrictions, those kind of things. And what Amazon does is they update what is known as their HIPAA white paper, which provides guidance for each of those services. Conversely, Scott also mentioned Microsoft. Microsoft's a great example, actually. Microsoft actually provides updated run books, essentially known as blueprints. So every single time Microsoft updates an eligible service, and Scott mentioned GDPR earlier, they also launched a blueprint for GDPR over the last couple months, which gives you as a healthcare organization essentially the run book for how do you deploy compliant architectures, whether it's infrastructure, platform, software. Then the challenge, of course, becomes how do you remain compliant, and that's therein lies a lot of the complexity. And so Scott's spot on. Those are some of the things, resources that are out there, to best help you. And Scott, you just mentioned, something around HIMSS as well. We've got HIMSS coming up. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of technology announcements, a lot of healthcare innovation announcements. I'd love to hear from you. What's some of the buzz or excitement that you're hearing about, and why are you excited to join this year?
Yeah. So, some of what we talked about so far has been more infrastructure as a service. Some of the things I'm getting more excited about, I think the market, our customers are getting excited about, are more platform types of things. So how do we do things that would be super hard to do with our own, tool sets, and machine learning. There's a big emphasis, I think, on some great new services there. Natural language processing. Amazon's got a new Comprehend medical solution. There are some great things like that I think can. They're sort of leapfrog technologies. We're working with one organization, for instance, that does transcription for physicians while physicians are real time in their clinic exam room talking with a patient, and this listens to that conversation and then provides transcription. And in this case, we've actually knit together two different clouds to provide a best of Amazon infrastructure services along with this natural language processing service. So really an exciting way to push ahead and again, use these advanced technology in a compliant way to make a difference. So I think that whole platform area, NLP and ML, are two great examples.
Yeah, I agree. In my world, it's interesting. We oftentimes focus on eating our own dog food early on. So, we've talked previously on platform around containerization, around the adoption of Docker, Kubernetes, and now we've moved into this other space. And you're exactly right around how do you now apply some of the technologies that Amazon, Google, and Microsoft have launched in the ML space or the NLP space, and how do you bring it to healthcare? How do you do things like being able to track your PHI inventory using some of these cognitive services and understand where your PHI is inside of the actual systems? And you've been an executive at many healthcare organizations. I'd have to assume that problems around really understanding how the application works and how PHI flows are still very significant ones in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. This idea of being able to trace and understand, which systems, or even more discreetly, which services have PHI is important. And then it's circling back to this theme of innovation and collaboration. It's even more important when you're working with partners. So these are, they could be business associates or other partners. And yeah, you want to know, you may have an assumption that this data that we're sending is de-identified. Well, but you want to make sure that's true. You can't just be an assumption. It's got to be confirmed. And it becomes even more complex when you look at the very powerful new architectures that contain microservices. It's great and terrific from an IT perspective, and it delivers a lot more utility and the ability to quickly advance applications and improve them. But with those advancements comes this complication of, where's the data, and is the data PHI, and where is it flowing? And so using new technologies, as you've described, Matt, are a great way to provide protection along with this innovation.
Yeah, I agree. So, last question, Scott, because I know we're wrapping up. HIMSS a couple weeks away. What are you, what are you looking forward to the most? What excites you as you head down to Orlando again?
Yeah, so I absolutely love connecting with some old friends and hearing what they're doing to make a difference in healthcare. It is exciting for me. It is energizing. And hearing some news stories. So that I thoroughly enjoy. And kind of coming back to these new concepts of what new technologies are we bringing to bear to improve patient care and natural language processing, machine learning, and as you described, I think actually this whole Kubernetes and containers are very, very powerful, and I'm excited to talk with my colleagues and health and IT leaders about what are they doing with those tools to make a difference.
That's extremely helpful. Thank you. And for the audience, I have to say you've heard me in previous CTO talks talk a lot about the transformation that I've seen. One of the neat things about not only working with Scott, but some of the things we've talked about today is that we have seen such a transformation in the conversations. Scott just talked about, meeting up with colleagues, friends, really talking about their transformation. It's amazing that 5 years ago, we're having conversations around, is the cloud secure enough? Is it compliant enough? Now we're talking, on a very different level. Now we're talking about, okay, back to Scott's earlier point, how do we take all of the new technologies and drive cost out of the way that we serve infrastructure or platforms or software to drive costs out of healthcare and make it a better experience all at the same time. So it's such a different conversation. It's an amazing and humbling one to be able to have. And, Scott, I'd like to just thank you for being with us today. And, to all you listeners, thanks for tuning in. If you have a moment to comment on today's episode, always check out or follow #CTO Talk on Twitter or follow me at MP Ferrari. You can always learn more about CTO Talk at HealthcareNOW Radio or at ClearDATA.com. I'm Matt Ferrari, and until we talk again, have a good weekend.